In this presentation, we'll be focusing on music for the keyboard, but this is really part of a larger tradition, a tradition of virtuosity that attained a peak in the Romantic era. Virtuosity, that is, having complete command over your instrument so that you can perform great technical feats with it, has likely been around for as long as music making has been around. The capacity to do very difficult music with your instrument is something that has been highly prized for a long period of time. However, this attained a truly expressive peak during the Romantic era and became a vehicle to showcase individual artists. At the piano, we'll see folks like Clara Schumann, Frédéric Chopin, and Franz Liszt. At the violin, we have the Hungarian violinist Joseph Joachim, as well as the Italian violinist Niccolo Paganini. These musicians and more create a virtuosic tradition that informs what we do as musicians today. It's why we work on memorization, why we practice scales. Even how we practice is informed by this virtuosic school. For right now, we'll be focusing on music for the keyboard, and in this presentation, we'll look at music of Robert Schumann, Frédéric Chopin, and Franz Liszt. During the 19th century, piano music was the only medium of domestic music to outsell vocal music. These included three basic types: pedagogical works, such as Carl Czerny's Etudes and his School of Velocity; works for amateur enjoyment, including simple dances, lyric pieces, character pieces, and sonatas. But then there were also the bravura pieces. These were virtuosic works intended for public performance and recitals. Here's a smattering of some of these. We'll begin with Schumann's Carnival. Robert Schumann originally published only for the piano. His early works including Papillon, or Butterflies, Carnival, the Phantasiastücke, the Kinderscenen, Kreisleriana, and Album für die Jugend. So we have particularly some early character pieces. That is, a keyboard piece that is bringing to life some idea or character. We'll look at two movements from his Carnival that are demonstrative not just of some virtuosic elements, but also certain compositional styles that we see in Schumann. His Carnival introduces us to a unified set of pitches that appear throughout the work. Here again we have the romantic ideal of organicism, taking a small motive and organically growing it out over the course of a whole piece. These pitches were A, E flat, C, and B natural. In German, this is A, S, C, and H. These letters were used throughout the work and were based on a theme of Schumann's to organize the various character pieces that made up the Carnival. This includes depictions of Chopin, Clara Wieck, Paganini, and a final rousing march against the Philistines. So this was Schumann's depiction of the Davidsbündel, the David's bundle or David's group. This refers to a biblical story of David against the Philistine Goliath. And here, the Philistines were cultural Philistines, people that poo-pooed the art that was being made at the time. Schumann was a big fan of Chopin. He famously remarked, "Hats off, gentlemen, a genius," when he reviewed Chopin as a music critic. Taking these letters, we see that they spell a number of words, or hint at a number of words. First, it likely hints at some letters of his name, either the A representing his middle name, Robert Alexander Schumann, or perhaps representing the A in his last name, as you see here. It can also refer to Fasching, which is the German word for carnival, or perhaps to ash, the German word for the English word ash. This refers to Ash Wednesday. Uh, Carnival traditionally occurred on what is known as Fat Tuesday. Uh, this period or this day was a big celebration before the season of Lent, which began with Ash Wednesday, a season of repentance and avoiding doing certain things that lasted for 40 days. So on Fat Tuesday, called in some cultures Mardi Gras or in other cultures Carnival, we saw a giant celebration. Literally, Carnival comes from the Latin words carne vale, farewell to meat, saying farewell to eating carnivorous foods, because for the season of Lent, meat eating would be restricted. You would be fasting during the carnival time. So we have some hints here at what these unifying pitches might refer to. And we see them crop up in a number of the character pieces. We'll listen to snippets of two character pieces, Eusebius and Florestan. Eusebius and Florestan were in some ways aspects of Robert Schumann's own personality. Eusebius was introvertive, introspective, considering, languid. And we see here adagio music. Pay particular attention to the first two measures in which we see the pitches A natural, E flat, B natural, and C prominently displayed. We also see a sort of sinuous, strange Schumannian rhythm here, a septuplet. We're a little bit unsure of exactly where the beat is. This sort of strangeness and twistiness is something that's integral to many of Schumann's works. Here's a little bit of Eusebius's character piece. We turn now to Florestan. Florestan was the heroic aspect of Schumann's personality, and we hear that represented in the music. This is truly a bravura piece, a virtuosic piece, with lots of fast-moving notes, big changes in dynamics and tempo. It's very dramatic and heroic. From the very beginning, we see those pitches that we are interested in. A natural, E flat, C, and B natural, which we hear as the first four pitches of our opening motive. Schumann would actually invoke these two sides of his personality in his writing, and sometimes they would be mediated by Master Raro, a sort of Greek philosopher type personage who would balance these two aspects, and he would write out dialogue for each of them, creating these or bringing to life these various aspects of his personality in his writings. We turn now to Frédéric Chopin, whose bravura works for the keyboard are extraordinarily well known and a core part of any pianist's repertoire. He's born near Warsaw in Poland, where he lived until 1830 when he was 20. There he left for Paris shortly before the November Uprising. This was a time that saw the Polish cadets battling against Russia, this conflict later spreading to Lithuania, Belarus, and the Ukraine. All his music includes the piano in some way, shape, or form. His most famous compositions include the solo etude, the preludes, his dances like waltzes, mazurkas, and polonaises, his ballades and scherzos, and of course the beautiful nocturnes. These, in many ways, typify the romantic pianistic ideal. These include the evocation of national styles. In Chopin's case, the Polish national styles, like the dances of the mazurka and the polonaise. They blend virtuosity with lyricism, for instance, in the ballads and scherzos, as well as the composition of evocative character pieces, musical works that bring to life a character or idea. In this case, we have the nocturne, which brings to mind ideas of nighttime. Here is a snippet of what is, in my opinion, one of his most beautiful nocturnes, the Nocturne in D-flat major, Opus 27, number 2. The nocturne as a whole actually takes a relatively traditional rondo form. We have an A section, which you'll hear in the opening, which is just a melody with accompaniment. And it alternates with passages of contrasting material. So the overall structure is A, B, A, C, A. What's particularly interesting about this piece is to follow the journey of the pitch A natural. It's the first chromatic pitch that's introduced, and you'll hear it in the second system, second measure here. That A natural starts from a non-chord tone and then moves up to be part of a chord and then moves up to be part of a key. In fact, it's actually, it becomes the root of a chord. And then it moves up to become a key area in and of itself. This is rather striking because A natural, or the key of A, is distantly related from the key of D flat. If we think of them as enharmonics, we actually see that they are a major third apart. They are a chromatic mediant apart from each other. But here we have Chopin slowly weaving in this strangeness. He's organically developing this small little idea, this A natural that starts as a tone foreign to the key, moves into the key, moves to be the root of a chord, and then moves to be the tonic of a key area. It's quite fascinating, and it's all filled, it all occurs within the context of a beautiful work. It almost feels like someone is gently strumming a guitar and whistling a melody, walking the streets as dusk is settling in. We'll listen to a snippet of it, and you'll listen to the rest of it on your own. end this presentation by looking a little bit at Franz Liszt. Liszt was a child prodigy who toured Hungary and Vienna. And when his family moved to Paris in 1823, he met leading artists of all media. From 1839 to 1847, he toured Europe, going to Turkey and Russia, and was the first pianist to give solo concerts in large halls, where he coins the term recital. He plays everything from Bach to Beethoven to modern pieces, or modern at the time, and he does this all by memory. There are stories of him as a child where people would quiz him. They'd give him a Beethoven opus number and a movement number, and he'd have to play that sonata. And of course, he could do it fabulously. In 1848, he stops touring to focus on composition and creates a virtuosic style of composition that incorporates narrative and nationalistic elements. As you might recognize, these are again hallmarks of aspects of the Romantic style, where we have a narrative, we have a story that's displayed in music, and that incorporates nationalistic elements. For instance, his tone poem, Hungaria, which is a work for orchestra, which calls to mind tunes and aspects of the culture of his native Hungary. Here's one of his concert etudes entitled Un Sospiro, the Sigh. We remain in D flat major like we were for the Chopin, but here we see this florid accompaniment, even more florid and involved than Chopin's. And it becomes quite involved for the extraordinarily simple tune, this sighing tune, which you'll hear is almost a hummable, whistleable tune. But underneath it is this complex accompaniment that, even though it is soft and introverted, is used to display the virtuosity of the performer who is bringing it to life.